Today from the global lane, back at the negotiating table, Trump seeks a nuclear deal with Iran. Will it be more of the same, or is regime change coming?
They know nothing but stalling and buying time, and really there is no goodwill at the table here. They are playing the same playbook that they have done with the previous administrations.
On the home front, additional auto tariffs about to kick in. Will they cause higher prices and industry layoffs?
There's actually very good news coming down the line. Tariffs are not likely to increase prices.
Precedent-setting deliberations for the U.S. Supreme Court over government funding of religious charter schools.
This is about not discriminating against an organization for its religious beliefs or religious teachings. The state of Oklahoma is going to lose, and we will have religious charter schools, perhaps of all types.
And who will Catholic cardinals select as the next pope?
I'd like to be pope. That would be my #1 choice.
And it's all right here on the global lane. Is a nuclear agreement with Iran getting closer? As another round of talks with the United States resumes, Iran watchers wonder if Israel will find terms of a negotiated agreement acceptable. Prime Minister Netanyahu insists that an agreement include the dismantling of the Islamic Republic's nuclear enrichment program. Well, joining us with more is Ramesh Separad. Dr. Separad is a George Mason University scholar, VP of Technology Risk and Compliance at Comcast, and board member of the Organization of Iranian American Communities. Dr. Separad, are the Ayatollah and his negotiators stalling, playing Donald Trump, or are they serious about resolving this dispute over the country's nuclear development program?
If you look at the track record of the Iranian regime, they know nothing but stalling and buying time, and really there is no goodwill at the table here. They are playing the same playbook that they have done with the previous administrations, whether it was the Obama administration or the Biden administration. So I think when we look at the holistic behavior of the Iranian regime, we have to really go back and understand, what does this regime stand for? It stands for terrorism, it stands for weapons of mass destruction, and they want to get their hands on the bomb. And they want to use these negotiations as a way to legitimize their terrorism at home and continue to bolster the IRGC's web around the world. And we need to really ensure that this regime is not going to be positioned for success through these negotiations. It should be the Iranian people that are positioned for success, who are calling for the change of regime.
Well, let's talk about that, because both President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu say Iran will never be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon, suggesting they'll take military action to prevent that from happening. So what would the Iranian people like to see happen?
I think what the Iranian people want is the recognition of the legitimate fight against this regime. When we talk about meaningful change, we need to really look at the message that's coming from inside Iran when they say down with the dictators, when they say democracy and freedom and the Republic of Iran is what they're asking for. But when you look at the message in the protests and the ongoing strikes and any nationwide protests, people are saying, down with the dictators, be it the Shah or the mullahs. So we really have to take that message from the people of Iran to heart and understand, how can we better support them as they are calling for a regime change in Iran. And to best support them is to recognize their right to overthrow this regime.
JNS reports that Swedish parliament member Ali Reza Akandi, an Iranian immigrant, believes a Libya-like deal to dismantle Iran's nuclear program would be insufficient. He says if Israel and the U.S. launch military strikes, they could destroy 1,000 sites and the regime would still remain. So he says the ultimate goal must be to topple it. So do you agree or disagree? What do you think?
The call for regime change, it's coming from inside Iran. We should agree with the message that's coming from the people inside Iran, who are saying we don't want this regime, and they're paying it with their lives. When you look at the young men and women in the streets fighting the IRGC, fighting the Basiji forces at the cost of their lives. When you look at the political prisoners that are fighting until the last minute before they're executed. If you look at the execution rate in Iran, this regime, since August, since the new president has taken over, Pezeshkian, has killed and executed more than 1,000 people. Why would the regime have to execute this many people? Because they are afraid of the people's power, and they are afraid of the organized movement for change that is taking more and more momentum. And no one no one should undermine the power of the Iranian people and their organized resistance movement when it comes to change and democracy in Iran.
Well, can it bring about real change? I mean, if the U.S. adopts a policy of regime change rather than negotiation, nothing has worked up to this point to bring the Ayatollahs down. So what will it take?
I think the policy of regime change that we experienced up to this point really hasn't worked. Obviously, there's ample examples of that, but I think policy of regime change from within Iran is the new approach that we need to take. When the people of Iran are resistant against this regime, and that resistance movement has been in place in the last 4 decades. It was the Iran's National Council of Resistance of Iran, the most organized and resilient and recognized opposition to this regime, who exposed Iran's nuclear threat to the world. They're the one who exposed Iran's missiles program. They're the ones who told the world that this regime is trying to get its hands on a nuclear bomb, and they also exposed Iran's web of proxies in the region. So it is the people of Iran who understand the most about what does this regime change mean, and we should really adhere to that message that is coming from Iran's organized opposition movement that really has this 10-point plan for the future of Iran that stands for the separation of church and state, stands for a non-nuclear, secular democracy, ballot box, where the people of Iran can actually decide who they want to have in the office instead of the theocracy that we're dealing with under this regime.
Okay, more support for the people. Dr. Ramesh Separad of the Organization of Iranian American Communities, thank you for sharing your time and insights. We appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
A 25% tariff on auto parts imported into the United States is about to kick in. Many Americans are asking, will the tariffs lead to higher prices for consumers and a loss of jobs for the country's 1 million auto workers? Well, here to share his thoughts is Spencer Morrison, author of Reshore: How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Okay, Spencer, many consumers are feeling a bit anxious about the tariffs on automobiles and now auto parts, so Trump's rolling back tariffs on steel and aluminum to help lessen the pain. Are higher prices still coming? What do you see happening?
It's a very good question, and I think people are right to be a little worried. I think people need to remember that what President Trump is doing is he's reversing 50 years of trade policy. For the last 50 years, America has had an economic globalist policy with very few barriers to imports. And what President Trump is doing is he's turning that entirely on its head. So I think, the proof needs to be in the pudding. People are worried about prices going up, as they should be. But there's actually very good news coming down the line. And that is that tariffs are not likely to increase prices.
Well, if we do end up with higher prices, let's say they do go up a bit, and a decline in car and truck sales, that may lead to layoffs in the auto industry, wouldn't it, or would it?
Well, I think it really depends. I think it's important to remember that the point of these tariffs, there's two purposes to them. One is to get other countries to lower their barriers to entry, to open up new markets for American exports. And if that happens, there's going to be an increased demand for American labor. For example, if the tariff rates in foreign countries were lowered to match the American rates, this is these so-called reciprocal tariffs, American exports would actually increase by $1.5 trillion. And that would support a tremendous amount of jobs. In fact, it would support probably about 4 million new jobs. A large chunk of those are going to be in industries that America has, lucrative employment in. For example, automaking.
We were talking before this interview about used car and truck prices. Might higher prices on parts cause those prices to go up? Maybe even less demand for new cars then lead to higher used car prices?
Well, I think, like I said, there's going to be two effects from these tariffs. One, it's going to be increasing exports, which is going to also increase the exports of American-made vehicles, which should actually increase demand for American labor. And then number two, there's going to be the reshoring of factories from foreign countries back to America, and that's going to actually increase demand for American labor. So we can actually have a paradox here where there can be decreased overall demand for American automobiles, but increased demand for American-made automobiles. And that's where the jobs are. It's in American-made automobiles and parts, not in these foreign-made products.
Donald Trump says, be patient, and Americans are listening. He says tariffs will bring back manufacturing to the U.S. Americans will be better off in the long term. So when would we expect the long term to kick in? Because right now it looks like we may be heading to higher prices and more inflation.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it really does depend on whether or not President Trump sticks to a stable and a high tariff regime. If the tariffs are stable and if they're sufficiently high, that's going to support the reshoring and reindustrialization of American industry, and that can happen pretty quick. For example, America was able to ramp up its economic production by over double in the space of 2 years in the lead up to World War II. And that was done through a cohesive industrial policy, which is what we'd like to see. So it's entirely possible that this reshoring could happen, before the end of President Trump's term. And that's what we'd like to see. But he's got to be consistent on tariffs, and he's got to have them sufficiently high so they're not just a revenue generation scheme.
Well, about $16 billion was raised from tariffs in the month of April. That isn't nearly enough to replace the income taxes the president would like to do, or is it? I mean, how could that ever happen to replace the revenue loss of the income tax?
Well, I think it depends who you're replacing it for. I mean, you have to remember that income tax is actually very, very skewed in the sense that the top 10% pay almost all of the income tax and the bottom 90% pay relatively little. So there has been some calculations done that show that if this tariff revenue keeps up the way it's going, President Trump could literally eliminate income tax for about 75 to 80% of American people and replace it with the tariff revenue.
And what about tariffs on China? Who do you think will blink first? Trump's already pulling back a bit on some of those tariffs.
Yeah, it's a little worrying. The reality is, though, is that America has all the leverage in the trade war with China. And the reason for that is because we actually purchase from China 3 times more products than we sell to them. So every, if the tariffs are even remotely reciprocal, we're doing 3 times the economic damage that they're doing to us. So we have all the leverage in the trade war with China. It's just a question as to whether or not President Trump is going to stay the course and have stable, consistent, and high tariffs against China. And if he does, America will win, no doubt about it.
Okay, Spencer Morrison, author of Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks a lot. God bless.
A pivotal Supreme Court case could set a major precedent regarding religious freedom and public schools. The High Court has just heard arguments in a publicly funded religious charter school case in Oklahoma, the first in the nation. CBN's Brody Carter brings us a brief look at the details.
St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Charter School aims to become the nation's first publicly funded religious charter school.
So why this would be so helpful is, as a charter school, when a parent enrolls their child into their school, their taxpayer dollars flow directly to that school. So they have opportunities at funding that a private school would not. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of St. Isidore, what you're going to have are opportunities around the country that have never been given before, which is access to religious charter schools for children, where parents don't have to try to scrape together funds to get their kids a great education.
Critics, including the ACLU and its partners, argue public funding for religious schools violates the separation of church and state while undermining religious freedom. Regarding this case, they state Oklahoma taxpayers, including our plaintiffs, should not be compelled to finance a religious public school that intends to discriminate and indoctrinate students into a singular faith. St. Isidore Catholic School is represented by the First Liberty Institute, which argues that the Constitution's Free Exercise Clause should take precedence over state laws. This case has captured national focus, with 12 states supporting public funding for religious charter schools. Justice Amy Coney Barrett has recused herself due to a personal connection, potentially setting the stage for a tie. I'm Brody Carter, CBN News.
Joining us with more is Erica Donalds, chair of America First Policy Institute's Center for Education Opportunity. Mrs. Donalds is also the wife of Congressman Byron Donalds and founder of Optima Ed, an education company focused on virtual reality learning experiences and virtual schools. Erica, one argument even from Christians is Supreme Court approval of taxpayer funding of this Catholic charter school would open the floodgates to funding of other religious schools, those operated by extremist Muslims, even Satanists. What say you?
Well, this is about not discriminating against an organization for its religious beliefs or religious teaching, something that the Supreme Court has upheld in recent cases. And that's why I think that in this Drummond case that the state of Oklahoma is going to lose, and we will have religious charter schools, perhaps of all types. But it's kind of like free speech, right? The rights established in the Constitution by our creator are given freely, no matter what type of speech that you're talking about, right? No matter what type of religion that we're talking about. So we have to be intellectually consistent that if we want free exercise of religion in these schools that have public funding, we're going to have to allow for all types of religion to take place.
Well, those opposing Oklahoma's funding of St. Isidore of Seville Catholic Charter School say the state's violating the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. So what is your response to that argument?
Charter schools, although they are considered public schools and have had the benefit of being treated as public schools throughout their history, are private entities that are contracted with the government. So a private entity that is running a school cannot be discriminated against in its ability to have a charter with the government to teach students because of its religious affiliation or religious teaching. And so this is going to be a difficult line to navigate. However, based on recent Supreme Court precedent, I believe that the government cannot discriminate against this private organization of which it has agreed to contract for public schooling because of its religious affiliations. And we're going to have to navigate what that looks like going forward for these what are considered to be public schools, public charter schools.
Well, how strong do you think that argument? You had mentioned the free speech issue. That's the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. How strong and valid is that argument that they're discriminating against religion?
Well, we've seen several recent cases where if a government program is widely available to any entity or organization to apply for public funding, they cannot choose one organization or another simply because that other organization is religiously affiliated. And so if that holds true, and you talk about charter schools, if Oklahoma is awarding charters to schools that meet certain criteria, in this case, financial, operating, and academic performance, which St. Isidore does meet, they cannot discriminate against this charter school that meets all of that criteria for a charter, but also has a religious affiliation. I think it's a very strong argument, and that's why many in the charter school sector rightfully are concerned because they've been considered public schools, and if they're deemed religious and not a public school, what does that mean for the entire sector and all the statutes that depend on charters being public?
So what can you tell us about the educational difference of these religious schools compared to regular secular schools, public schools? What does testing show?
Well, in this particular instance, St. Isidore actually has outstanding test results, well above Oklahoma's average performance and performance of other virtual charter schools, and which is why we believe that parents should have this publicly funded option for their children. We really need a free market in education. We need more high quality options to enter the marketplace, whether they're religious or not, whether they're virtual or not, whether they're charter or private. We've got to open up the free market and allow more innovation and competition on quality measurements in order for parents to have the most quality options available to them for their children's needs.
Okay, this Supreme Court ruling is expected by late June. It would be precedent-setting. So what would a favorable or disfavorable ruling mean for educational opportunity in the United States?
Well, it's going to start, of course, with this one school in Oklahoma being approved and Oklahoma's families having this additional high quality virtual option that may align with their religious affiliation available to them through public funding where they would not have to pay tuition. But I expect that similarly high performing private organizations are going to apply for charters across the United States in order to receive public funding, especially in states where religious schools have been discriminated against, have not been allowed to apply for charters. And in some states, Charter is the only way for a private organization to run a school that is publicly funded if they don't have ESAs or other scholarships. So I expect it will give rise to more high-quality school options for families across the country, which is something that we want.
Okay, we'll wait and see what SCOTUS does. Erica Donalds, America First Policy Institute's Center for Education Opportunity. Thank you for being with us. All our best to your husband, who's running for governor of Florida. May God sustain him in his campaign.
Thank you so much.
Catholic cardinals around the world are converging on Rome to select a new pope. A total of 135 electors under the age of 80 will begin the conclave on May 7th. President Trump was asked who he would like to see chosen as the new pope. He joked about himself, then suggested an American candidate.
I'd like to be pope. That would be my #1 choice. No, I don't know. I have no preference. I must say we have a cardinal that happens to be out of a place called New York who's very good.
Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York City would be an excellent choice for pope. He's a devout conservative with a good sense of humor. However, there's never been an American pope, and Dolan understands that he would be an unlikely selection. If the cardinals wish to continue the path established by Pope Francis, one that embraces liberation theology, a leftist doctrine that focuses on systemic injustice, poverty, and inequality, they might consider someone like Cardinal Luis Tagle from the Philippines. Tagle has advocated for the Catholic Church to be more welcoming to members of the LGBTQ community. The cardinals may also consider it time to elect the first pope from sub-Saharan Africa. In that case, they could choose Congolese Cardinal Basungu, who led African bishops in opposing same-sex marriage, or Cardinal Sarah from Guinea, another conservative. Both would likely steer the church back toward a more traditional Orthodox doctrine, emphasizing Africa and its significant missionary efforts. Cardinal Pietro Parolin is another strong candidate. As the Vatican Secretary of State, he's worked closely with Pope Francis, and he's well known among the cardinals. However, his connections to China may deter the cardinals from selecting him, and he's seen as an insider. We will learn their choice soon, marked by the appearance of white smoke atop the Sistine Chapel. Let's pray for the Catholic Church and the person who will be chosen as the next pope. Pray for godly wisdom and biblical fidelity, and that God's will may be done. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.